The chair now recognizes Senator Zaffirini.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members, as a member of the State Affairs Committee, I listened intently to the testimony for and against Senate Bill 6. Out of respect for both the Lieutenant Governor and the author of the bill, both of whom I thank for their leadership and effectiveness in addressing this issue, as well as their fairness, I promised both that I would do so, and that if I were 50-50 on the bill, I would vote for it. The more I listened, however, the stronger my opposition grew. Although Senate Bill 6 requires men and women to use the restroom associated with the gender markers on their birth certificates, and Texas allows these markers to be changed on birth certificates and driver's licenses, I learned that this is difficult, expensive, embarrassing, and in some cases, impossible to achieve. I saw and I listened to transgender men, some of whom had deep voices and heavy facial hair, and I realized that they had no business in women's restrooms, that their presence there would disturb any woman who doesn't want a man in the women's restroom, whether he is cisgender or is a transgender male. I saw and listened to transgender women, some of whom had breasts and feminine voices, and I realized that they had no business in men's restrooms, that their presence there could disturb many men, and that they could be physically, verbally, or sexually assaulted, perhaps even killed. I saw and listened to transgender boys and girls and their parents, and realized that this bill could result in unintended physical and emotional harm to these children simply because their gender identifications differs from the gender markers on their birth certificates. I listened and gained insight into using respectful language. For example, that a cisgender person is one whose gender identity aligns with the sex he or she was assigned at birth, and might have trouble understanding the needs, interests, and challenges faced by those who are transgender. That a transgender man is not a woman who chooses to be a man, but rather is a man who was assigned the female sex at birth. That a transgender woman is not a man who chooses to be a woman, but rather is a woman who was assigned the male sex at birth. I was moved by the anguish and dismay expressed by transgender men and women, and by the love and insight articulated by mental health experts and religious leaders. The statistics regarding suicide, for example, were disconcerting. Studies have shown the prevalence of suicide attempts among transgender persons to be at least 40%. Descriptions about the beatings, humiliations, bullying, and insults endured by transgender men, women, and children were difficult to endure. It broke my heart to realize the extent to which so many have suffered, and I did not want to add to their burden. I strongly agree with supporters of Senate Bill 6 that men should not be in women's restrooms, but I also believe that neither should transgender men. Equally important, I strongly believe that transgender women should not be in men's restrooms, and that their using those facilities could put them in harm's way. My concern is that Senate Bill 6 would have an unintended consequence of causing great harm to transgender men and women, boys and girls. Accordingly, I will respectfully vote no. Thank you, Mr. President and members. Thank you, Senator Cokhurst.